Greetings YouTube, this is Rhett with Rolling Forward, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about a typical day at Rancho in the very early stages of the entire rehabilitation process. So I have recently arrived at Rancho. Again, we're talking, this is 1968 people, this is a long time ago, and these are some of the topics that I wanted to specifically address in this overall series was some differences in the rehabilitation process in 1968 versus 2021. Back in my day, it was very common for a newly injured person, such as myself, to spend much longer in rehab than is typically done or allowed today. I was in the rehabilitation center. I was in an initial hospital for about a month and a half, and then from basically May through late September, I think it was, I was in Rancho, and that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 4.5 months, something like that. A fair amount of time. And the first few days, as I mentioned, I was given the Rancho orientation that I needed to learn these things in order to keep my body well and healthy, to allow me to live my life going forward. So a typical day in these early times is going to physical therapy. It so happened in my case, physical therapy was in the morning, I think 3 days a week. Occupational therapy in the afternoon, I think it was 3 days a week, each for about 90-minute appointments. There were also regular appointments with the urology department, not daily, but probably every other week, something like that. Also, there was occasionally, and I mean very occasionally, a psychologist available to talk to. We were encouraged to speak to the psychologist, but there was not much emphasis placed on it, frankly. And then there was school, because I was still in high school at this time, you may recall, and as we were just entering summertime, it was late May, there was no school since my injury. So school would start in the fall, but not yet. Now, as I just mentioned, hospitalizations were much longer in the olden days, and there's some reasons for it. One, most people, such as myself again, back in the day, spent the first 5 or 6 weeks basically stuck in bed in traction, spinal traction, and there was not yet any newer technology invented. That actually happened right about the time of my injury. There was a device called a halo. That stood for something which I don't remember, but it was basically a rigid vest which was custom made to fit your body, and onto this vest there were 4 metal poles that went up on all 4 sides of your head, and a metal band was screwed into your skull, and then that band was then attached to those metal rods that went up vertically by your head. And the advantage was you could get out of bed right away within days. So even though your vertebrae were not yet healed, this kept them sufficiently immobilized that you could get out of bed and you could begin the rehab process. Now in my case, and in the case of most people back in the day, a lot of the very initial physical therapy was training your body to become functional in a non-horizontal position. So after you have spent 6 weeks in bed horizontal, when you were sitted up, if that's correct, sat up, I don't know, you would immediately become dizzy and pass out because of blood pressure. Your body was not used to keeping your blood pressure in the normal range when you were non-horizontal. So the first week or two was going to physical therapy, initially on a gurney, because it took several days to get a loaner manual wheelchair. So the first few days, sent to physical therapy on a gurney from my room, pushed there, just around the corner of the hallway, and I was placed upon a standing table, which was simply a lightly padded board upon which I was placed, strapped in, and then one leg was put in a brace and was lifted up and stretched, and the ropes tied near my ankle were attached to the metal frame at the top of the standing table, and the table was then hand cranked toward a vertical position. And the first few days, I might have my head raised no more than 1 or 2 feet above my foot, so very slightly tilted up, and I would begin to be dizzy. Stop there. And so I would stay there with one leg stretched up to begin stretching my hamstrings, and after about a half an hour, put down flat, switch to my other leg being pulled up in front of me, and then put back into a position closer and closer to standing, to vertical. That took a couple of weeks, and daily you would progressively be cranked up closer and closer to vertical, and your body would again become accustomed to maintaining your homeostasis, your stable blood pressure, when you were non-horizontal. So that lengthened the time of rehab because they couldn't really begin doing much other than that. Getting me ready to sit in a wheelchair is what it really amounted to. And so, a wheelchair. Well, at first, Rancho had an inventory of old manual wheelchairs. They were old beaters, but they worked. And I was put in a chair that was too wide for me by a large measure. It was a big chair, so it was suitable to my height, but it was a big old monster. And it meant someone had to push me around the hospital, but at least I could be sitting up and seeing better. At that point, begin going several times a week to occupational therapy, where my arms were stretched a lot during the appointment, loosened my shoulders, elbows, wrists, fingers, everything of my upper body. It felt good to me. A lot of people had a lot of pain during this process. To me, it was refreshing. And then, again, I was a relatively high-level injury, meaning I had very minimal strength in my upper extremities, very weak muscles in my shoulder, and very little bicep. And that's a function of the level of your injury. The higher the injury, the greater the paralysis. The line of paralysis would rise up, and I had only a few nerves really going to my biceps and my shoulder. So in occupational therapy, we would work and work and work my shoulder muscles, my biceps, with the massive amounts of weight, such as 6 ounces today. Oh man, that's up 2 ounces from last week. That's good. And that eventually went up sufficiently to strengthen the muscles that did have innervation and could be contracted by me voluntarily. Again, because of the high level of my injury, I had very few muscles to exercise. But staying mobile, the range of motion, the stretching, is necessary basically forever to keep your body loose enough to be handled, moved, lay in bed, positioned, and so on. Of course, there were other reasons for the longer rehab times. The rehab process was becoming more and more understood, and great pressure from the insurance industry to get us the hell out of the hospital. It is expensive. It is very expensive, and it has, in my opinion, gone too far. At this point, 2021, people are sent home prematurely, in my opinion, with insufficient orientation, insufficient understanding of their injury, insufficient concepts of how to keep oneself improving and healthy and stable, and ill-equipped with not enough equipment, not enough information, not enough orientation, again, I'll say. Well, that's just the way it is these days. And there are a few other clinics that were regularly visited, not daily. There's a seating clinic, which is really concerned with skin integrity when you're sitting in a wheelchair or lying in bed to prevent pressure sores. That will become a topic in the future for sure. Urology, training your bladder. What does that mean? Well, we'll go into more detail about that in future videos as well. And finally, well, not finally, also the bowel program. Training your intestines, your lower bowel, to have a bowel movement when you want it and not when you don't want it. And that is a practice, a program that we all learned and were importantly supposed to learn. These issues will play a role for the rest of my life. And so far, it's been 53 years since my rehab, and I'm still pretty much on the Rancho program in most areas. And the converse of the above, as I was told on day one, I was to participate actively in my rehabilitation program. If I didn't show up for appointments for any reason, there was sanction. You were accosted shortly after you failed to show up, and you better have a good reason. And if you do that much, you're going to get booted. They did not waste their time on people who were not able or willing to give their all, including undergoing some pain, some physical pain in the process, which was necessary, and the respect of showing up to appointments for which you're scheduled, and if you're not going to be there, could have been used for somebody else. So it was a system which required your input. And I think I'll leave that at this point until the next video. So again, please subscribe to the channel. It helps it grow on YouTube. Click like, and YouTube, I'd like to say thank you for showing up and watching this video. Ciao.